Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a stack of sources focusing on day 15 of the Sean P. Diddy Combs trial.
Right.
Our mission today, really, is to cut through the noise and pull out the absolute key nuggets. The witness testimony, the courtroom dynamics, and those core legal strategies that are really coming into view now.
That's right. And day 15, it puts us squarely in the middle of the trial. It's a crucial point for both sides, really.
Building on yesterday, day 14.
Exactly. We're building on what we saw yesterday, which included that continued cross-examination of the former assistant, Mia.
And that was, well, intense based on the sources. The defense attorney, Brian Steele, really pushing hard, accusing her of fabricating abuse claims even.
He was, but the reporting indicates she remained pretty composed under that aggressive questioning. She did, and the judge actually had to step in and tell Steele to move on, suggesting, the line of questioning was getting repetitive or maybe overly argumentative. And then right at the close of day 14, we also heard briefly from Sylvia Oken, a custodian from the Beverly Hills Hotel.
A custodian? That seems like maybe an unusual witness in this kind of case.
It might seem so at first, yeah. But sometimes custodians, they hold critical, even seemingly mundane back-end data that can be relevant. Oken mentioned cleaning fees related to Combs' stays.
Okay.
And specifically a charge for oil damage. Now, it's a small detail, sure, but the prosecution might try to use it later, maybe as a subtle hint, sort of tying these everyday records to allegations of more disturbing incidents like maybe drug use or assaults.
Okay, so day 14 ended with those threads kind of hanging the aggressive cross.
Yeah.
That potentially suggestive billing detail. And then day 15 kicks off with some unexpected drama.
Right out of the gate, the sources report an individual actually heckled Sean Combs right there in the courtroom, yelled an expletive before being removed.
Wow. Interrupting the proceedings like that, that's bold.
It definitely created a stir. And what's notable is this happened just after a prosecutor had told the court the day before that someone violated the pseudonym order for Mia, but outside the courthouse. Now, there's no confirmed link between the heckler and that person, but it just, underscores the heated atmosphere surrounding this trial. Reporters apparently rushed out of the press room when it happened.
I can imagine. It really shows how much public attention and, frankly, raw emotion is tied up in these proceedings. So beyond that unexpected moment, what was another major point of contention early on day 15?
A really significant debate flared up around using that CNN cell phone footage, the 2016 incident with Combs and Cassie Ventura.
Ah, yes, the video.
The prosecution wants to bring in a video expert to basically break down the sequence of events in that footage for the jury.
And the defense, I assume, is strongly opposing this, led by Timmy Geragos.
Exactly. Geragos called the footage unduly prejudicial. That's the core of their argument. The prosecution wants to use a compilation video, but the defense is worried about how it's edited. They're arguing it might make it look like Combs immediately followed Ventura, which they say could mislead the jury.
Right.
The prosecution countered, saying, well, security video timestamps themselves can be inaccurate, and they suggested maybe inserting breaks in the video. It's a classic legal fight, really, over how evidence gets presented and how it shapes perception.
It sounds technical, but it's so crucial, isn't it? Because that video is such a central piece of the public narrative around this whole case. And there was something about birthday celebrations being relevant that seemed a bit odd.
Yeah, it was a somewhat unusual detail. The prosecution apparently wants to introduce recordings of Combs' jail phone calls.
Okay.
And in these calls, he was reportedly organizing social media celebrations for his birthday.
Huh. Why?
Well, the prosecution's argument seems to be to portray this as Combs trying to, quote, change the narrative or control his public image, especially since the defense had shown a video clip of Mia's birthday during her cross-examination.
Ah, I see. So it's about this strategic maneuvering over how Combs is being portrayed. Optics.
Exactly. It speaks to that constant battle over narrative control in front of the jury.
Okay, so we have courtroom tension, these strategic battles over key evidence and narrative. But the real meat of the day, what filled up a lot of the reporting, was the testimony of this hotel security guard, Eddie Garcia.
Absolutely. Eddie Garcia. He worked at the Intercontinental Hotel back in 2016. He was the security guard who witnessed and documented that physical assault involving Sean Combs and Cassie Ventura, saw it on the hotel's monitors. He's a critical witness.
And importantly, the sources say he's testifying under an immunity deal.
That's key, yeah. It means he can talk about his actions related to handling that video without, fearing charges himself for those specific actions.
Right.
His testimony provided a really detailed account of what he saw and, crucially, what allegedly happened after the incident regarding that video footage.
Okay, so walk us through his account. What did he say?
Garcia testified he saw the incident on the monitors. He recognized Sean Combs when he looked closer, and he recognized Cassie Ventura, confirmed it was Combs involved.
And police weren't called at the time?
No, because according to Garcia, Mrs. Ventura didn't request it. He said he received an incident report and it had a video file attached, but he noted it was unopened.
Okay, and then the calls started. This is where it gets really specific and potentially pretty damaging for the defense, right?
This is where the story gets fascinating, yeah. The alleged sequence of attempts to get or suppress that video. Garcia testified he first got a call from Christina Courtroom, identified as Combs' employee.
Okay.
She asked for the video, apparently claiming Combs was intoxicated and didn't remember what happened. Garcia told her she needed to go through hotel management. Standard procedure.
But she didn't just give up there.
No, according to Garcia's testimony. Courtroom later actually came to the hotel looking for him, asking for the video again. He repeated, management or subpoenas, but then he said off the record, he told her what he saw was bad.
Bad. And then she allegedly put Combs himself on the phone.
Yes. Garcia testified Courtroom passed the phone to Sean Combs. And Combs asked him, "Do you know who I am?"
Wow.
Garcia said yes. Combs again asked for the video, repeating that he'd been intoxicated. Garcia said he couldn't provide it. And Garcia described Combs as sounding nervous, talking fast, and stuttering during this call.
That detail about his demeanor, nervous and stuttering, that's striking. So after that call, what did Garcia do? Did he report it?
He emailed management, specifically his supervisor, Abel Medrano, and this email, it was shown in court. It's evidence of Garcia documenting the contact.
Okay.
It apparently even included Courtroom's unredacted phone number and noted something like, "Tomes, a.k.a. P. Diddy, says he is a patron and wants to talk to you."
And the alleged contact didn't stop there, right?
Yeah.
It escalated to his personal phone.
That's what Garcia testified, yeah. Courtroom called his personal number, which he said made him nervous, and again, put Combs on the phone.
Okay, and this is where the alleged offer came in.
This is it, according to Garcia. He testified Combs told him he sounded like a good guy, that he could help, that something like this could ruin him, meaning Combs, and that the video getting out would ruin his career. And then he allegedly said if Garcia could make it happen, he would take care of him.
And Garcia understood take care of him to mean money for the video.
Correct. That was his understanding. So Garcia then reached out to his supervisor, Medrano.
Right.
And Medrano, according to Garcia's testimony, said he would do it for $50,000. $50,000. Garcia relayed this back to Courtroom, put Combs back on the phone, and told him that both he and his boss were willing to erase the footage for $50,000.
But wait, the testimony later revealed Combs allegedly paid $100,000?
Yes. Double the amount discussed initially. And Combs' alleged reaction when he heard they'd do it for $50K was, according to Garcia, quite something. He testified, Combs said, "Eddie, my angel God is good. God put you in my way for a reason. I knew you could help. I knew you could do it."
Eddie, my angel. Wow. That phrase just hangs there.
It really does. And Garcia testified Combs immediately then asked if anyone else had inquired about the incident or the video.
Covering this basis, so what happened next? They agreed on the price. Sort of.
Well, Garcia testified Medrano told him to fudge the timestamp on the shift logs related to the incident.
Okay.
And then told him to go to a high-rise building in Los Angeles to meet with Combs. Garcia described the meeting, said Combs was smiling, seemed excited, while Garcia himself felt anxious. Courtroom was there, and Garcia said Combs even had her get him some tea.
Huh. Tea. It's such a mundane detail in the middle of what sounds like a very high-stakes illicit transaction.
It does paint a strange picture, yeah. Garcia said he handed Combs a copy of the video. Combs, according to Garcia, stressed that it had to be the only copy, asking specifically about iCloud, things like that.
Making sure there were no backups.
Exactly. Garcia said he told Combs he believed it was the sole copy Medrano had taken off the server. But Garcia also mentioned he was worried police might look for it if Ventura decided to file a report later.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What was Combs' response to that concern?
Garcia testified. Combs said, "Don't worry about it. Cassie wanted it gone too."
Mm-hmm.
And then, to apparently back this up, Combs allegedly called Cassie Ventura on FaceTime right then and there, showed Garcia the phone. Garcia recognized her.
Okay.
And Garcia testified he overheard Combs tell her, "Let him know that you want the video to go away too." And then, according to Garcia, Ventura told him directly that she had a movie coming out and yes, she wanted the video to go away.
Wow. That potentially implicates Ventura as well, or at least suggests her alignment with wanting it suppressed, according to Garcia's account of that call. What about identification? Did that come up?
It did. Garcia testified. Combs asked for the IDs of Garcia, Medrano, and the original responding police officer whose name was Israel Flores.
Okay.
Garcia noted, though, that Flores was known to be very straight, unlikely to cooperate with something like this. So Medrano apparently suggested another name, Henry Elias, instead. Combs confirmed Henry's ID.
And then the non-disclosure agreements, the NDAs.
Yeah.
They came out.
Yes. According to Garcia, Combs produced NDAs. The prosecution showed one in court, Exhibit GXC 106, which Garcia signed. He testified he was nervous, wasn't given a copy.
And the key part.
The key line shown from the exhibit allegedly stated, "I've provided the only copy of the video and the penalty for violating it. Liquidated damages were set at $1 million.
$1 million. And didn't the sources mention Garcia's hourly wage was something like $10.50 at the time?
That's right, $10.50 an hour versus a potential $1 million penalty. It really underscores the power dynamics and the perceived value placed on keeping that video buried.
Absolutely. So then came the payment itself. How did that happen?
Garcia testified Combs put cash through money counters, stacks of tens of thousands. The screen showed $100,000.
Right, the $100,000. So why double the $50,000 they were discussed?
Well, Garcia testified the extra $50,000 was for him and for what he thought was Israel Flores, the officer they apparently replaced with Elias. So the total $100,000 was allegedly handed to Garcia in a brown paper bag.
A brown paper bag, full of cash. That detail, it really paints a picture, doesn't it? Almost cinematic.
It does. Garcia said a bodyguard and Cristina Courtroom were also present when the money was handed over.
Okay. What happened right after he got the money?
Garcia testified Combs actually escorted him to his car, asked how he planned to spend the money, and advised him, not to make any big purchases right away, keep a low profile.
And how did Garcia say he distributed the money?
According to his testimony, he called Medrano, gave him his $50,000 cut, he gave $20,000 to Henry Elias, the replacement person, and he kept $30,000 for himself.
And what did he do with his share?
He said he used it to buy a used car, paid cash.
Did Combs ever reach out to Garcia after all this went down?
Garcia testified Combs did contact him later, sent messages like, "Happy Easter, God is good," and offered help if Garcia ever needed anything. And interestingly, Garcia admitted that years later, he actually messaged Combs on Instagram asking if there was any work available in Los Angeles, but he never heard back.
That's quite a postscript to the whole alleged payoff. So during cross-examination, how did the defense try to, poke holes in Garcia's story?
Well, they highlighted that Garcia got double the amount his boss, Medrano, had initially requested. They confirmed he told his boss about it because he wanted to be honest with Medrano.
Okay.
They also pointed out that Garcia later asked Combs for work, maybe implying some kind of ongoing connection or hope for benefit. And they got him to confirm that while the NDA said he shouldn't talk, it doesn't legally prevent him from telling the truth in a court case like this.
So they're trying to raise questions about his motives, maybe his credibility, while also legally acknowledging he has to tell the truth now. After Garcia's really detailed and, frankly, dramatic testimony, did the prosecution bring in anything to back it up?
Corroboration.
They did. A stipulation was entered, that's like an agreement on a fact, stating that law enforcement had seized 2 cell phones from Cristina Courtroom at the Miami airport.
And evidence shown to the jury from one of those phones included contacts listed as Eddie My Angel with his phone number and another contact, Eddie My Angel's friend Intercontinental.
Eddie My Angel, directly from the alleged quote.
Exactly. And critically, a photo of those IDs Garcia mentioned, that photo was also found on Courtroom's device.
So the phone records in the photo seem to directly link Courtroom to Garcia and that alleged ID collection part of the story.
Precisely. They also entered records from Signature Bank. The sources suggest these would provide some financial documentation relevant to transfers involving Combs accounts, though the direct link to the $100K cash payment itself wasn't explicitly spelled out just from these transfers alone in the reports we saw.
Okay, so incredibly powerful testimony from Garcia, followed by evidence the prosecution is using to try and bolster his account. The next major witness of the day was Derek Ferguson. Different angle here, right?
Completely different angle. Derek Ferguson is another crucial witness, but for entirely different reasons. He was Sean Combs' CFO for a long time, 1998 to 2017.
Wow, nearly 2 decades.
Yeah. And later he was chief growth officer at Revolt Media and TV. He handled Combs' personal finances at times, too.
So he has deep, intimate knowledge of the structure, the finances of Combs' businesses.
Exactly. He testified Combs was the sole owner, 100%, of Bad Boy Productions and Film, focused on the creative and marketing side. Other ventures, though, like Bad Boy Records and the Sean John clothing line, they had partners and were profitable.
And how was Combs typically paid from all these different entities?
Through salary and distributions from the companies, using banks like Citibank, HSBC, Signature Bank. Ferguson himself had signing authority on some accounts. He also mentioned Janice Combs Music Inc. as a business checking account.
And there was an account tied to the spirits business with Diageo and Essig.
Yes, funded by inflows related to that partnership. He also talked about credit cards, mainly American Express, used for both personal and professional expenses, which were paid by the companies.
What about cash? Garcia talked about a lot of cash.
Ferguson said cash was handled through petty cash, or advances, mostly for travel, but he specifically stated he was not aware of security staff routinely carrying large amounts of cash for Combs.
Interesting counterpoint there. He also managed Combs's personal finances. Budgets, properties.
Right. Properties in multiple states, the Hamptons, New York, Miami, Alpine, New Jersey, held in LLCs, which he explained was for anonymity, liability protection, and tax benefits, standard practice for high net worth individuals. He also testified he knew Combs financially supported other people from his personal earnings.
Did the prosecution present specific financial documents during Ferguson's testimony? Bank transfers?
They did. They showed some large internal transfers like $190K, $575K, $100K back in December 2011. But crucially, they highlighted an outward transfer of $20,000 to Cassandra Ventura.
Ah, back to Cassie Ventura.
And interestingly, also an inward transfer of $20,000 from someone named Rodri Ventura.
Another potential financial link connected to Cassie Ventura, presented by the prosecution. Now, this is where the defense really seemed to use Ferguson's testimony to build their counter-narrative, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The cross-examination of Ferguson by Mr. Ignolo, it was clearly designed to paint a very, very different picture from the prosecution's. He started by establishing Ferguson's impressive background, Bronx native, Stuyvesant High School, Harvard MBA, giving him significant credibility as a, seasoned financial executive.
Setting him up as a reliable witness for their side.
Exactly. And then they focused on the structure of Bad Boy Records, specifically mentioning the partnership with Arista Records, which was owned by BMG Music Group.
Why was that important for the defense?
This is key for them. By highlighting that partnership, they show Combs didn't operate in a vacuum with absolute total control. There were agreements, partners like BMG, that limited his autonomy. This directly pushes back against the prosecution's depiction of him as the sole, all-powerful leader of this alleged enterprise.
Right, suggesting a more complex business reality.
Yes. Igno also brought up Ferguson seeing working for Combs as a way to hire people from the community, provide opportunities for young executives at Bad Boy.
Kind of framing Bad Boy as a positive force, providing opportunities.
Yes, exactly. They went into the evolution of the business structure, adding things like Notorious Magazine, connections to other labels like Interscope, UMG, Rhino. And then they spent time on the partnership with Diageo for Combs Wine and Spirits.
This part seemed really strategically significant for the defense's wider arguments in the case.
It definitely seemed that way. Ferguson testified about ongoing tension with Diageo over marketing and distribution, feeling it was too concentrated in urban areas.
Okay.
He mentioned Combs' lawsuit against Diageo, alleging discriminatory practices. That lawsuit was actually settled earlier this year, in 2024. The defense seems to be trying to connect this to a theory they've hinted at before, that external forces, maybe even the government, treat Combs unfairly because of his race.
Introducing the idea of external bias.
Right. The prosecution objected to this line of questioning, but the defense managed to get the point across that Combs perceived and acted on what he saw as discriminatory practices by a major corporation.
So the defense is trying to plant that seed. Maybe there's external bias impacting Combs. It's not just internal misconduct driving things. What about Revolt Media and TV?
Ignolo really emphasized that Revolt was owned by Highbridge Capital Management, which was later bought by J.P. Morgan Chase.
Big corporate owners.
Exactly. Highbridge had 2 seats on the board. Ferguson himself was COO, overseeing finance and production, and the defense specifically highlighted that Sean Combs was not in management at Revolt.
And they even showed an organizational chart. DX 1901.
Yes, listing Ferguson, James Cruz, Andre Harrell, and others as the executive team. The clear goal here was to visually reinforce the defense argument. Sean Combs was an executive, yes, but within large, complex corporate structures, multiple layers of management, multiple decision makers.
Pushing back hard against that micromanaging head of a criminal enterprise narrative the prosecution needs for RICO.
Precisely. Ignolo also noted Ferguson's CPA background and the fact that Ferguson testified he never saw Combs personally reviewing his own American Express bill, again, supporting the idea that delegation was the norm, not micromanagement.
More points for legitimate business and delegation.
That's the theme. They discussed security as a necessary business expense for Combs' safety, using cash receipt forms for touring normal business practices.
Okay.
Then Ignolo asked Ferguson directly, "Did you ever see Combs or others commit crimes?" Including what was referred to as essay, which often means solicitation in legal context, though not explicitly defined here, or tax evasion.
And Ferguson's response.
Ferguson said he would never intentionally allow fraud and specifically said no to witnessing essay or trafficking.
So the defense gets his longtime CFO on record saying he didn't witness criminal activity ordered by or involving Combs directly related to these kinds of charges.
That's a key piece of their strategy to counter those RICO charges. Ignolo also asked about the hard work involved in building the business, the long hours. He even showed a text from Ferguson to Combs saying he learned a lot, that Combs pushed the team, had passion, trying to humanize Combs and present a more positive view of his leadership from someone who worked closely with him for years.
Were there any objections during this?
Yes. The prosecution objected when Ignolo asked about Ferguson being religious or being on the board of Combs' charter school for at-risk kids.
Trying to bring in character evidence, maybe?
Likely how the prosecution saw it, yeah. Unrelated to the specific charges. Interestingly, though, the sources noted that when Ignolo asked Ferguson point blank if he thought highly of Combs, Ferguson testified he didn't know how to respond to that.
That pause, that uncertainty. It kind of hangs in the air, doesn't it? After nearly 2 decades working together, what happened on redirect? Did the prosecution counter?
The prosecution on redirect clarified a few things. That Revolt Films was separate from Revolt TV, and they actually used that same organizational chart, DX 1901, the defense introduced.
Oh.
They used it to point out that Sean Combs was listed as chairman on that very chart, and that Christina Courtroom and Mia were also listed on it, under development and acquisitions.
Ah, so the prosecution used the defense's own exhibit to show Combs' high-level title and visually connect him, via the chart, to key individuals mentioned in the case like Courtroom and Mia.
Exactly. It just shows how both sides are using the same facts, the same exhibits, but spinning them to support their very different narratives about Combs' organization and his role within it.
Fascinating. Yeah. Looking ahead, the next witness expected is an anonymous accuser referred to only as Jane.
Yes, scheduled for later in the week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday. The prosecution has already requested that the public screens in the courtroom be turned off during her testimony. They cited concerns about accidentally disclosing unredacted information, similar to what they said happened during Mia's testimony. It suggests her testimony might be particularly sensitive or potentially graphic.
Okay, so we've covered a lot from day 15. The courtroom interruption, the strategic fights over evidence, like the video, Eddie Garcia's incredibly detailed testimony about the alleged payoff, and then the dueling narratives presented through Derek Ferguson's testimony and cross-examination. Let's try and connect this back to the big picture, the overall trial context, and that really serious RICO charge Combs is facing.
This is where all these pieces are meant to fit into the prosecution's larger puzzle. Their strategy is clearly to use testimony like Garcia's, the alleged video suppression, the cash, the NDAs, and elements from Ferguson's testimony about the financial structures and transfers to tie everything to that RICO charge.
Right.
They need to show a pattern of alleged criminal behavior, arguing these weren't just random, isolated acts, but part of an ongoing criminal enterprise led by Combs.
And a key part of our RICO is that the enterprise has to have affected interstate commerce. How are they arguing that?
Correct. The prosecution is arguing that Combs's business's bad boy, his fashion ventures, operated across state lines. The alleged incidents often happened in luxury hotels in different states. His own travel, like flights mentioned to places like St. Bart's or Las Vegas, obviously crosses state and national boundaries.
So the businesses and the travel create the interstate link.
That's their argument. That this connection through legitimate businesses and personal travel is proof the alleged criminal activity affected interstate commerce, hitting that crucial legal requirement for a RICO conviction.
And they're using witnesses like Mia, Capricorn Clark, others mentioned in the sources, to try and paint a picture of a top-down structure where Combs was in charge.
Yes. They're trying to establish that people close to Combs allegedly worked under pressure, maybe feared disobeying him, were directed to cover things up or even lie. This, combined with testimony like Garcia's alleging direct involvement in suppressing evidence, is all aimed at building that image of a coordinated, organized operation with Combs firmly at the top as the leader, the director.
Okay, so that's the prosecution's framework for RICO.
Yeah.
A pattern of alleged crimes, crossing state lines, directed from the top by Combs. How is the defense specifically attacking that RICO framework?
The defense's core argument against RICO, which came through really clearly during Ferguson's cross-examination, is that Sean Combs was running legitimate, complex businesses. Businesses with formal executive structures, multiple decision-makers, standard operating procedures.
Not a criminal enterprise.
Exactly. They're pushing back hard against the idea that he personally directed every single action related to any alleged misconduct. They argue he wasn't micromanaging a criminal enterprise. He was overseeing vast legitimate business interests.
And they're arguing the incidents themselves don't even meet the legal threshold for RICO, that it's not a pattern.
Precisely. They contend these are isolated, maybe unconnected incidents scattered over many years, not the clear, sustained pattern of racketeering activity required by the RICO statute. They're essentially saying the prosecution is forcing a narrative onto disparate events to try and make a charge stick that doesn't actually fit the reality of his business operations over decades.
They also seem to be challenging the idea that the alleged victims were coerced, which is often key in racketeering.
Yes. The defense's position seems to be that the alleged victims were adults who made their own choices. Many were compensated financially. They argue there's a lack of solid evidence proving physical force was used consistently in the instances the prosecution is trying to link together as part of this alleged pattern. If you undermine the coercion element, it weakens the racketeering claim significantly.
And that emphasis on delegation we talked about with Ferguson, that's crucial for their counter-argument too.
Absolutely. The defense is hammering the point. Combs delegated tasks like any CEO or executive in a large company would. If employees or associates engaged in misconduct, the defense argues that doesn't automatically prove Combs ordered it or even knew about it.
Plausible deniability through structure.
Essentially, yes. Their main message is consistent. He ran businesses, not a criminal empire. In this case, as the prosecution has presented it, simply does not fit the strict legal definition of a RICO prosecution.
Yeah, that lays out the competing strategies really clearly. We've seen the prosecution use this incredibly detailed testimony, specific evidence like phone records and bank transfers, to try and build a case for a coordinated criminal enterprise. While the defense uses other details, testimony about business structures, the concept of delegation, to frame Combs as a legitimate businessman whose actions or the actions of those around him don't fit the RICO mold. Why is understanding this level of detail, digging into hotel logs, bank records, the specific points made during a CFO's cross-examination, even the significance of showing an org chart, why is that important for you listening to this?
Well, what this kind of deep dive really reveals is the intricate, often painstaking process of how these complex legal cases are actually argued in court. It shows how every single piece of evidence, every witness's statement is presented, then immediately challenged and often recontextualized by the other side. It highlights the specific legal hurdles, like the complex requirements for proving a RICO charge, and exactly how the prosecution and the defense are trying to convince the jury about the fundamental nature of Combs's activities. Were they legitimate business operations, maybe with some bad actors, or was it all part of a coordinated criminal enterprise with him at the center?
And it really brings home the challenge the jury faces, doesn't it? Trying to determine intent, control, responsibility within a large, complex organization. How does the prosecution prove that actions taken by employees were directly ordered or known by the person at the top?
Exactly. And conversely, how does the defense successfully argue that those actions were either independent employee misconduct, maybe just part of legitimate, albeit sometimes messy, business operations, or simply unconnected events that don't form a criminal pattern under the law?
Testimony like Garcia's provides potentially powerful evidence of alleged direct involvement, maybe in suppressing information.
Right, while financial records and management structures, like those discussed by Ferguson, become tools for both sides, either to prove coordination or to demonstrate standard business practices and delegation.
It really is like both sides are using the exact same puzzle pieces, but trying to assemble two completely different pictures for the jury.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, We've navigated the drama, the detailed testimony, the evidence from day 15. We've seen the prosecution trying to build that case for a coordinated top-down criminal enterprise, using accounts of alleged video suppression, financial links, witness fears, and that's pitted directly against the defense's portrayal. A legitimate business structure, standard executive delegation, arguing these are isolated incidents that just don't meet the high legal bar for racketeering.
It's a fundamental clash of narratives, a clash of interpretations of the facts being presented day by day.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to consider as you process all this. Given these really conflicting narratives from the prosecution and defense about the structure of Combs' businesses, about the actions of people within them, how do you think about the sheer complexity of attributing responsibility in a large organization? Especially when you're facing charges like RICO that really hinge on proving a pattern of coordinated criminal behavior. What level of detail, what kind of connection is truly needed to establish that pattern convincingly in your own mind? Something to definitely mull over as we wait to see what happens next in this trial.